Alrighty, let's begin. So, thank you everyone for coming today, and welcome to our first Financing for Post-Secondary seminar brought to you by WARP7 and Wealthsimple with today's guest speaker, Sam. We'll start things off with a brief disclaimer. By entering this event, you agree to be photographed and recorded, and to the distribution of such photographs and recordings by all parties through any and all media. If you do not wish to be recorded, please rename yourself to your first name only and/or your team name. We ask that you please leave your video off at all times. Thank you. We'll now do a short land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. And just some final points with seminar logistics. All seminars will be recorded. All participants will be muted with their cameras off at all times. Questions shall be asked through the chat only. Send your questions to the person named Send Questions here at any time you want. And without further ado, I'm very excited to present our guest speaker of the day, Sam from Wealthsimple.
Thanks, Dashal. Hi, everyone. My name is Sam. I'm a software engineer at Wealthsimple. My pronouns are she and her. And on behalf of the Wealthsimple Foundation, I'm super excited to be presenting on financing for post-secondary. So some of the things that we're going to cover today are just understanding the costs of post-secondary. This might be super new to you as you're starting to kind of explore options for post-secondary, or you might kind of already have an idea of where you want to go and what you want to do. So this might just give a bit more information of what to expect. We'll talk a little bit about budgeting. If you tuned in last week for the seminar, there's a lot more information about budgeting. So we'll touch on a few key things that are related to post-secondary here. We'll talk a lot about financing through a bunch of different means. Talk about a few tips for managing your money once you're in post-secondary. And we will do a very, very high level intro into investing. So first of all, what does it cost to go to university? So I'm sure many of you have already started looking into this, and it's absolutely no secret that post-secondary education can be very expensive and has increased tremendously over the last number of years. It's really important to know at least a high level of what these costs are before you head to post-secondary so you can prepare. And a lot of factors can really go into how much this will cost for you specifically, including what school you want to attend, what program you're going to study, where you're going to live, maybe some other like fun extracurricular things you want to do that might also cost money. So all of these things will affect like the total cost for you specifically. The main costs for being a post-secondary student, and this is a very average calculation, include things like tuition. And again, tuition can be on average about $7,000 a year, but really depends on the program and the school. It also can depend on course load. If you're taking a reduced course load and increased course load, summer semesters, that all can factor in to your tuition. And then things like all your living expenses. So housing, books, supplies if you need for your course, if you're doing a very specialized course, things like your phone bill, maybe your internet bill, utilities, if you're living somewhere that you need to pay for utilities, food, all of those things can add up quite quickly. For example, living costs can vary quite drastically depending on where you choose to live. Some, but not everybody has the opportunity to live at home while studying. So if you have the opportunity and you wish to live at home during this, that can save a considerable amount of money per year, because without paying for residence and additional utilities, et cetera. But there are benefits to living on campus as well. Like being on campus is a shorter commute. There are other like social aspects of being on campus as well. So these are all like things to weigh out. Personally, for me, I didn't have the opportunity to live at home for university. So I ended up living in residence for a year. And then all of the other years of schooling, I shared apartments or houses with friends. So that did definitely add up for me because I didn't really have the opportunity to live with family. And just going to preface this that we are going to provide this deck and all of these resources at the end of this presentation. So these are just some examples of some costs for a bunch of different programs. There's a university program in there, a college, and a trades program. So it can be quite a range depending on what you're pursuing. So we are going to provide a few examples here of different avenues. One other resource that we'll provide at the end is this money management calculator. Would highly suggest going to this website and taking a look at some of the inputs to understand what your specific situation might be. And it will give you a better idea of, based on what you're planning on doing for post-secondary, how much it might cost you per year and for your whole post-secondary education. So budgeting, again, last week we talked a lot about budgeting. So if you're able to get your hands on the recording from that, it will give you a bit more in depth on what budgeting is and some tips for budgeting, but talking about it with a lens of post-secondary. So it is extremely important as we approach post-secondary to start thinking about budgeting in a greater sense. With post-secondary, we're looking at, yes, monthly budgets, but there are a lot of other things that we need to consider. If we're taking financial aid like OASP, those things come into our accounts at a couple times a year, but maybe books and tuition and rent need to come out at different, on a monthly basis or at different times. So building a budget really allows you to track on a time basis how much money you'll need when. And it can just give you a better idea of what things you want to be accounting for. So this resource was shared last week, but we'll share it again this week. And it's a little bit of a budgeting template that you can use to input some of your costs. So if you've gone through that first step in the previous exercise to understand what some of your costs might be, this is a good tool to input those things to start looking at how you can work your budget with your situation in mind to make sure that your money is being used efficiently for when you need it. All right, so now we have in our heads like post-secondary is going to cost us a lot of money. How are we going to pay for it? Let's talk about a few different options for paying for post-secondary. So the first thing we want to talk about is student loans. This is probably one of the more widely known and widely used ways of paying for post-secondary. And especially with government student loans like OASP, and there's a federal student loan program as well. These programs will provide money for paying for post-secondary. So they can be used for tuition, books, living expenses, but that's what they should be used for, but they can be used for anything. So there is really no restrictions or hard restrictions on what these can be used for. They need to be applied for every single year. Now, this is a loan, which means it needs to be paid back. So this is not necessarily free money that's being given. This is money that's being lent. And then after the study is done, it needs to be paid back. And a lot of these also have an interest component. And so interest really is the cost of borrowing. So when a government or even a bank is providing a student loan, they expect to be paid back, but they also expect a percentage of what needs to be paid back on top of that in order for them to afford to be able to lend you this money. And oftentimes these student loans can the payment can be deferred for up to 6 months after school is done before interest starts accruing. So if used appropriately, that can be a good tool if you're getting out into the workforce and it takes a little while to get on your feet, but also keeping in mind that the more that's paid down before this interest starts accruing, and even during post-secondary, if you're working a job and you can continue to pay down the student loan while you're in school, can reduce the interest payments later on. So again, talking about OSAP specifically as a loan service, these are a few resources for you to read over on what OSAP is, what the application process would be. Everybody is different and every situation is different. If you're getting close to post-secondary and OSAP is an option for you, you're probably already very familiar with the application process and these resources. But it is absolutely dependent on the person. It does need to be applied for every year. So based on your need, the amount that will be granted to you or given to you will change depending on your need each year. So it's a good idea to kind of go into these resources to understand what that might look like for you, so you can understand maybe where the gaps might be when you're looking at financing for your specific post-secondary situation. Now, we've talked about loans, which is money that you need to be paying back. Let's also talk about grants. And a grant is money that does not need to be paid back. So this is money that is given to someone, oftentimes based on financial need. Canada Student Grant is one of those things. And it can be applied for through the province. And everybody who applies for it will be assessed based on their need. And they can receive, a range of funds depending on need. And again, this does not need to be paid back. This is money that's deemed necessary, and it is given to the students with the expectation that it's being used for those post-secondary needs. Now, RASPs, and RASPs are something that the Wealthsimple Foundation deals with more directly. And so what an RASP is a savings account or a savings plan that is tax advantaged, and it's designed mainly to help Canadian students pay for post-secondary. So it is an account that's opened for somebody who will eventually be going to post-secondary. And just keeping in mind that this money is, when it's contributed to the RASP, it is usually locked in until that student needs it for post-secondary. So it does have quite a large government contribution component. So just for opening up this account and contributing, the government can match a certain percentage up to a limit to this account for you. So that's technically free money from the government. So that's something to keep in mind, that almost all Canadians are eligible for this top-up program from the government. But if the money is taken out and not used for post-secondary or taken out early, the government top-ups are forfeited. So that's just something to keep in mind when we're talking about an RASP. And even if you're headed to post-secondary next fall, it's not too late to open up an RASP or get a parent or a guardian to open up an RASP. It can be opened up even when you're in post-secondary. It can be opened up until the maximum age, which will provide all the resources for that. And so it is never too late to actually open up and start contributing to this. Personally, my parents opened up an RASP for me when I was quite young, and they were able to benefit from these government top-ups. And the money grew significantly over time, because keep in mind, this is an account that is being invested in the market, and it's meant for being a long-term investment and can grow quite consistently over time. And actually, I ended up paying for all of my post-secondary with an RASP, which was, super fortunate that I was able to do that. But it's just a good thing to keep in mind. And if there's any parents also watching this, we will be providing a lot of resources on RASPs, and we'll also be providing a link to book time with a portfolio manager at Wealthsimple if you're interested in knowing more about this. Now, coming with the RASPs, there are other grant and bond programs that are partnered with RASPs. So the Canada Learning Bond specifically is another program by the government that will help pay for post-secondary. So just by opening up an RESP, opening up and putting, I don't know, $100 in there just to open up and have an active account, you can apply for the Canada Learning Bond, and it's based on financial need. And if deemed eligible, a student or a youth or whoever this account is opened up for can be given, on top of the top-up program that I mentioned previously, can be given up to $2,000 per student, so per child. And this has absolutely no impact on any other government benefits that you or your family might receive. So if this is a situation that you think you might benefit from, would highly recommend looking into this. Again, there is no maximum, or there is a maximum age for RESPs, but as long as you're within that maximum age, it's never too late to open an RESP for your post-secondary, even if you are going next year and you think that you would be eligible for the CLB. This is a huge opportunity to be getting extra money from the government for post-secondary, and we'll be sending out specific resources about the CLB in particular. One more thing we'll talk about is scholarships. Similar to a grant, scholarships and bursaries are money that usually doesn't need to be paid back. This is money that's oftentimes given by private institutions and private entities. So you might notice like there might be a scholarship that's given by a specific company or by a university or even by individual people can contribute to scholarships. And they're a little bit different because they're handled privately. So there's a couple of resources there to understand what scholarships might be available. But when I tell you there are like hundreds of options for scholarships, there are tons. This is a really good opportunity to take the time and take a look at these if that's something that you're interested in. Scholarships and bursaries, scholarships specifically, are usually based on academic merit. Bursaries are usually based on financial need. So taking a look at some of those that might suit you are a great option for financing for your post-secondary, because there's a ton of money to be had out there. It does take a little bit more time to apply and a little bit more digging, but there are scholarships and bursaries based on demographics, based on where you grew up, the program that you're looking to take, even your extracurricular activities or your interests. It's well worthwhile taking a look. The financial aid offices at your school of choice or your post-secondary institution of choice would have a lot more information for you there, and potentially some of your high school guidance counselors might also have information for you if you're interested in this. So would encourage you to ask there, because they would have the best information for you about scholarships in particular. The last piece of financing that we'll cover is a student line of credit. So similar to a loan, a student line of credit is borrowing money from a financial institution, and you will only pay back what you borrow, but you do pay interest on that. And the difference between a student loan and a student line of credit is the interest on a student line of credit is due immediately, usually immediately once you borrow the money. Sometimes there's a bit of a grace period, it depends, but with the student loan, that interest doesn't start accruing until 6 months after school is finished. With a student line of credit, that might be a little bit different. The interest rates are often a lot lower on a student line of credit, but it does need to be paid back sooner. So just keep that in mind. But the nice thing about a line of credit is it can be paid back throughout post-secondary. So thinking of it almost like a credit card-ish, but much lower interest rate. So it is another opportunity to be using this for financing post-secondary. So let's talk about managing money at school and some tips. So as we mentioned, budgeting is extremely important for understanding your costs and understanding how you can use this money that's coming in through any of those financing opportunities towards those costs. Getting a part-time job might be an option for you as well. I know I worked summer jobs every single summer in between my semesters. I worked part-time jobs during the school year for a couple years to help alleviate some of those additional costs that came with post-secondary, and also to allow myself some money to enjoy some social time at post-secondary as well. Textbooks, as I mentioned, textbooks can be really, really expensive. It's actually shocking how much textbooks can cost. So looking into some different options like used textbooks and ebooks. A lot of schools have student associations or student groups that organize used textbooks, buy, sell, swap, or even looking into things like Marketplace. All would be good options to help to alleviate some of the costs of textbooks in particular. We'll talk quickly about credit cards. So credit cards is a kind of like a loan, but it is allowing you to borrow funds up to a pre-approved limit. Some of you might already have a credit card or might have a credit card that is tied to a parent or guardian. You must be 18 years of age to have your own credit card. Credit cards can be super helpful. They can help build your credit history. They can help bridge short-term gaps if you know that a textbook payment is due today and then a part-time job check is coming in tomorrow. These are good, can be good things to be using, but to be really, really careful about credit cards is they have very, very high interest rates. So if you carry a balance, meaning you do not pay off your credit card bill by the end of the month, you can be paying generally 20% interest of the amount that you've borrowed. So that can add up quite quickly and that can compound every month. They can have, annual fees, foreign transaction fees if you're spending money abroad, and additional late fees if the money isn't paid off. So those are all things to keep in mind, that having a credit card but using it responsibly. And then on top of that, if a credit card bill is not paid, we talk about credit cards being good for credit history. If a credit card bill is not paid, it can be actually quite bad for credit card or for credit history. Credit history is something that might be important when you go to rent your first apartment, buy a first car, buy a first house. So having a healthy credit history is really important. So making sure that when we get credit cards, we're using them responsibly and we're paying them off as quickly as possible. And again, those budgeting templates can really help to understand the inflow of cash and the outflow of cash and where a credit card might fit in there, making sure that it's being paid off at the right time. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about investing. Just gonna preface this, it'll be super high level. There will be more resources afterwards. And again, there is going to be a link sent out that if you would like to book time with a portfolio manager at Wealthsimple, there'll be a link to book with them if you would like to learn more about investing with your specific situation. So looking at investing, talking about saving versus investing, short-term versus long-term. Investing is something that allows your money to grow over time. We're investing in something. So we're investing in maybe a stock or a group of stocks, meaning you would own a piece of a company or own a piece of a group of companies. And so that company would take your money that you're lending to them. They would use that money to increase the value of the company, and your piece of the company would increase in value with it. So when you talk about the market going upwards and downwards, that's kind of what it means at a very, very high level. And a lot of these gains can be really seen over longer periods of time, which is why it's really important to be starting investing early if that's something that's available and of interest to you. And investing can be started super small. You don't need to have thousands or millions of dollars to be investing. It can be started with as much as you have, as much as you're willing to contribute. Again, based on your individual circumstance, a portfolio manager or somebody like that would be able to give you a bit more information about what that looks like. And just a reminder that you need to be 18 years of age or older in order to be investing. So what is investing? So again, investing is putting money aside with a goal of creating more earnings and maximizing your returns in the future. So this is investing for long term. We don't often talk about investing in a short term. You know, markets go up and down. Stocks go up and down. I'm sure you've been hearing about the meme stock craze earlier this year, where stocks, you know, rose super quickly and then fell super quickly. So it's good to keep in mind that investing is more of a long-term approach. Markets generally have an upwards trend over a very long period of time. But saving is about keeping money more accessible for a shorter period of time. So if you have a shorter term goal that you're saving for, or something you need to pay for more in the immediate term, saving is another option for you. This is just an example, a bit of a visual about saving versus investing. We talk about short-term and long-term. So when we talk about saving, let's talk about it in the sense of like putting it in a checking account, maybe a low interest savings account, putting it in a piggy bank, keeping cash on hand. That's the idea of like taking $20 a month, putting it away. It's probably not going to grow very much, but it's not going to go anywhere. So you would, you know, after 35 years of putting $20 a month away, you'd have about $8,400. This is a very hypothetical situation, but putting that money into an investment, not touching it for that 35 years, you know, $20 a month, can have much higher gains. That money will not be as accessible, but you know, you're taking a risk by putting it in the market, but potentially could be quite much more rewarding. And with the note on starting early, you know, growth compounds growth. So, you know, if you have a 5% growth rate, that will compound year after year, month after month, depending on how it's compounding. So again, looking at starting early, this solid line here is if we were to start by putting $1,000 a year into an investment, starting at age 25 with the goal of accessing this at retirement age 65. So over about 40 years, $1,000 a year, which is, you know, your input of $40,000, could grow at a 5% growth rate to $124,000. Now, if we wait 10 years and put $1,000 a year in at age 35, so we only have 30 years of growth, we'll see that money grow to about $67,000. So we're actually like cutting our potential gains in half here. So again, if it's available to you, and if it's something that you're interested in, it's not a bad thing to be starting to think about this earlier, especially as we're starting to think about longer term goals like retirement. It might not seem like we need to worry about retirement right now, but believe it or not, the earlier we start, the less we have to worry about it later on. With another note on investing and why starting early is important, we'll talk a very little bit about inflation. Again, you might have been hearing about inflation in the news. Inflation rates are extremely high right now, but just looking at the price of a cup of coffee across a number of decades, you know, in 1970, a cup of coffee was 25 cents. And by 2019, that same cup of coffee is $1.59. So understanding that $20 in my pocket today does not mean $20 in my, or it does mean $20 in my pocket in 20 years, but that $20 does not afford me the same things in 20 years as $20 affords me right now. So understanding how we can make our money work for us and grow over time to counteract things like inflation as things become more expensive in general over time. So again, one more resource that we'll share with you. Wealthsimple put out an investing masterclass a while back, and you'll all have access to take a look at this masterclass and check it out if you're interested in learning more about investing. Again, all of these resources will be available. All of these links will be available, and we'll send out a link to connect with a portfolio manager if that is of interest to you. So thank you so much for attending the presentation or listening afterwards. From the Wealthsimple Foundation, this is our mission to enable a brighter future for everyone in Canada through access to post-secondary. And with that, would love to take some questions, Dashiell, if you have any for me.
Yeah, awesome. We have a few here. Thank you so much for the presentation. start off with this question here. If I do have debt, should I prioritize paying it off or saving for a house?
So again, talking to somebody who is a financial advisor, a portfolio manager can speak more to your specific case because everybody's case is different. In general, it's important to be looking at paying off debt, especially high interest debt, first and foremost, because that debt will continue to compound and continue to need to be paid off. So if that is available to you, paying down debt is usually a good first option.
Is it possible for me to open an RESP for myself below the age of 18?
So no accounts can be opened for yourself below the age of 18. You can have a parent or guardian or other family member who is of age open it for you on your behalf. If you are of the age of 18, you can open it for yourself. It's just unfortunately with regulations, nobody under the age of 18 can open an account for themselves because it is investing.
Should I consider college over university because it's cheaper?
I mean, that is a really personal decision. Some college programs can be much cheaper. I mean, if budget is something that is important to you, that's something that needs to be considered. You know, a holistic view of all of these things is important to look at when looking at, you know, which program to choose, you know, everything from what line of work you're interested in, what you're interested in studying, and also costs are also to be considered. So, I mean, that's something to talk about with a maybe a guidance counselor or one of your teachers or a family member, because that is a very, very personal decision.
Is there a good amount of student debt that's considered to be okay? For example, is it 10% of the costs for the year versus 20% of the costs for another amount?
I mean, again, like I'm gonna have to default to it depends. Depends on your situation because, you know, just to get through school, some people may have to take on more student debt than others. So talking about it as a good or a bad thing is tough because it is really based on need and based on your individual circumstance. Obviously, objectively, less debt will be easier further down the road. But if that allows you to finish your post-secondary, get a job in a line of work that you're interested in, and then be able to pay that debt back, then that's a different story. So debt is important to be able to be used for these things. If we're taking on debt for important things like actually paying for school, then, you know, that's not necessarily bad debt. But if we're taking on this debt and then we're using it for other things that aren't necessarily school related, that's also just something to be considered if that's you know, necessary, and if we'll be able to be paying that back in the period of time that we want to.
My parents can't help me pay for school, but I have an RESP. Is it possible for me to enable matching for myself with my own money set aside from my part-time job?
So if you already have an RESP open, that means probably a parent has opened it for you. You can actually just like get your parents to, or your family member or whoever has opened this RESP for you to contribute money. So if you give them money, they can contribute it on your behalf to that account. It's important to talk to whatever financial institution has opened this RESP. They can help you make sure that all of the documents are in place to get that government portion. I know there's a few things that need to be included, like the SIN number for whoever, for your parent or your primary guardian needs to be added to the account to make sure that the government matching can happen. And if you are eligible for the Canada Learning Bond, that can also you can talk to your financial institution to make sure that that is applied for so that you can get the maximum amount of money from the government.
If I've started my post-secondary program already, is it still possible for me to get any money through matching, or is that something that is only possible leading up until the start of post-secondary?
No, so none of these things actually expire until you hit that maximum age, which, don't quote me on it, I want to say it's like 31 or something. So you'd have to look into the docs a bit more from the government, and we can send all those resources out. But if you've already started post-secondary, you can absolutely still open this account. Talking to your financial institution and working with them to make sure that it's open, and if you're of age or above age 18, you can open it for yourself. So talking to your financial institution about the best way to do that for you. And again, Wealthsimple has some portfolio managers available if you want to talk about opening that for yourself.
How much should I save if I'm starting with a part-time job in grade 9? What percentage should I set aside a year?
Again, that's going to be really dependent on your situation. That's actually a really great question. It's so great that you're thinking about saving early. It's always that balance between enjoying the money that you have, because you're working for a reason, and making sure that the money that you're making is going towards whatever your goals are. So if your goals are to save for a trip, or to maybe buy your first car, or save for post-secondary, like all of those things are things that you can be saving for. So understanding, what your short-term and long-term goals are, and then taking a look at how much money is coming in and how much money can be saved. I mean, it's never too early to be saving for the stuff, and it's not a bad idea to be saving whatever money you can as well.
What if I'm in grade 12? Is it too late to get any grants?
Absolutely not. I mean, with respect to the RASP and some of these Canada Learning Bonds or the government matching, it's not too late. Other grants need to be applied for as you're looking at post-secondary. So making sure that you're taking a look at any due dates, so that those individual grants or scholarships all probably have their own due dates, because they're handled every year. So taking a look at what those due dates are, again, like there'll be a ton of resources shared, talking to your guidance counselors, talking to some of your post-secondary financial aid offices. They can give you a better idea of due dates for applications. But at this point in the year, if you're looking at post-secondary next year, there's probably still some options to be applying for those.
Alrighty, awesome. So thank you, everyone. Thank you very much to everyone who was able to be here with us today. This is just a reminder that all of our seminars are going to be available on our YouTube channel, Team865. I want to say a thank you to Wealthsimple and Sam for presenting here with us today. And feel free to check us out on any of our social media pages for more information about anything. Thank you very much once again, and that concludes the seminar.